Yeah. Okay. Welcome to our shir, and we want to give a thank you to the people who sponsor it, Rabbi Gideon Gatsiani and family, and Rabbi Shimel and family. We will now continue with the story about the Tzemach Tzedek's Nesius. The Tzemach Tzedek, even before he became Rebbe, we're going to go back a little bit in time, and we're going to try to cover it in the next few weeks, all the details of the Tzemach Tzedek's Nesius, because it's a very stormy time in those days. This is like the years were about 1840s, 1850s, 1830s. The Tzemach Tzedek, even before he became Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, his grandfather, already involved him and appointed him to become involved in Askonus HaKlal, in community affairs. And he was doing different things for the Yidden in Russia. When the Tzemach Tzedek became Rebbe, so there were many Rebbes in the Ukraine in those days, in different parts of Russia. There were leaders of communities, there were Rabbonim. Everyone did whatever they can with Mesiras Nefesh to help out their communities. But at Tzemach Tzedek, the difference was that he not only took care of the Chassidus Chabad, but he was trying to help out and was Mesiras Nefesh Mamish. He literally threw his life away, gave up his life for Yidden in all over Europe, actually in the whole world. Wherever Yidden needed help, the Tzemach Tzedek was involved and was Mesiras Nefesh to help them out. Now, we will talk about in the next few weeks about two battles that the Tzemach Tzedek had, two milchamos that he had in those days that are the main. There was a lot of things that he had to take care of, but there was a two-pronged war, sort of, with two very, very frightening things that were happening in those days in Russia. Russia, Ukraine, Volyn, Lita, and so on and so forth. And basically, I'll just say the Bechlolos, what was the problem. One was the terrible Haskalah movement, a terrible disease amongst the Jewish people, the forerunners of the Reform movement. Today's Reform members are all Torah Yidden who pasha tinoikis shenishbu. But in those days, unfortunately, it started in the days of the Baal Shem Tov, and then continued by the Alter Rebbe, as we spoke about in the past. The Maskilim in those days, the Enlightenment, were Yidden who there wasn't enough that they were Rachmana litzlan Kaifrim and didn't believe in the Eibishter and Torah mitzvahs, but they had one goal in mind. They wanted to make sure that all Yidden are moved away from belief, from Emunah Tehira, from believing in the Eibishter. They wanted to change everything. They wanted to try to make that the Chadorim, where children, Jewish children learn, they should be forced to learn the Russian language and other apikursische things. They wanted that the learning of Torah even should be different. Like for thousands of years, the Yidden have been teaching Kometz Aleph O. They wanted to change that. And so on and so forth. Many Jewish minhagim they wanted to change. And this was their goal, to rip away Yidden from Yiddishkeit. Like the Milchama of the Greeks against the Yidden. A Ruchni, a spiritual Milchama. And the Tzemach Tzedek, in his days, the Maskilim became very empowered, very strong, unfortunately. They gained a lot, they had a lot more members, and they gained power with the government. And they, Pashit, were fighting tooth and nail to hurt the Yidden be Ruchnis. It came to a point, again, I'm just touching this subject, and we'll try to talk about it in the next few weeks. It came to a point where the Haskalah movement became sort of frightened from the Tzemach Tzedek's power. And they decided that the cornerstone of all Yiddishkeit in those days, all over Europe, stems from the Tzemach Tzedek in Lubavitch, and therefore they decided that their war is going to be against the Tzemach Tzedek personally. And they tried, and unfortunately, they caused him a tremendous amount of problems. So that was one battle that the Tzemach Tzedek had to fight in communal affairs. Another one was a terrible thing that took place in those days, a terrible decree, a very vicious, cruel decree that happened. And we're going to back up a little bit. We spoke about it a few months ago, how the Mendel Rebbe, who, when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, when the Alter Rebbe passed away, his tzion, his oihel, is in the city called Hadich, which is in the Ukraine. The Mittler Rebbe moved to Lubavitch with his son-in-law, the Tzemach Tzedek, and he became Rebbe. He became the next Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe. So how come the Mittler Rebbe's tzion and oil is not in Lubavitch? It's actually in some faraway shtetl called Nyezhin. And Nyezhin is somewhere in the Ukraine. Why is that? And we spoke about it, that the Mittler Rebbe in the last days, in the last years of his life on this world, the Tzar of Russia, who was a very, very cruel and evil person, and hated the Yidden very strongly, and also these Tsars were all Christians who wanted very much, that was their goal in their life, is to try to convert as many Yidden Chas v'Sholom as possible to become Goyim. So the Tsar came out with a decree. The decree started earlier, where all Jewish communities were forced, even though they had enough people in the army in those days, enough soldiers from the Goyish communities, they forced Yidden to provide soldiers, Yiddish soldiers in the army. And the decree was to send Yidden that were 18 years old approximately. And they sent them, they used to force them to go to the army at 18 and keep them there for a long time. The system was set up in a very nasty way for the Yidden, that from every 2,000 Yidden, if I'm not mistaken, from every 2,000 Yidden, they would have to, every 2,000 Yidden in a community, they had to send one soldier. Yeah, but the Tsar, what happened was the Tsar was told that the pressure and the decree that they're trying to take Jewish soldiers in order to force them away from Yiddishkeit, it didn't work. Why? Because the 18-year-old Bacher in those days knew about Yiddishkeit. He knew what it means to be Meiser Nefesh for Yiddishkeit. He knew what it means to keep kosher, the Yomim Tovim, Shabbosim, v'chulu v'chulu. And the mitzvahs that he did is already ingrained in them. So an 18-year-old Bacher who was forced in the army didn't necessarily go away from Yiddishkeit. Maybe they became a little bit vergrebt. Maybe they didn't have Jewish friends and so on, and they couldn't learn anymore. So there was a chmanas on them. But they didn't become total non-Jews because of that. So the Tsar came out with a new decree. And this decree was in the last year or so, or less even, of the Mittler Rebbe's Chaim Chayusoi Ba'al Modain, of the Mittler Rebbe's life in this world. And the new decree was, number one, from every 1,000 Yidden they have to send one soldier. And the second thing was, we're not taking any more soldiers of 18 years old. We will take them from their homes at age 7 or 8. Rachmana litzlan. The description of what went on in those days because of that decree, that the Tsar said they should take away little children from their homes, 7 and 8 years old, was literally heartrending. How many families, Nebuch, suffered the tragedy of losing a child to the Goyish army? They would take them at 7 and 8 years old and keep them in the army for 25 years. But that was not the only cruel thing they did. They would take them away at 7 and 8 years old. They couldn't train them yet for the army. What would they do? They would take them from their Jewish communities to far places in Russia where there were very few Jews or no Jews at all. They would put them up by some Goyish farmers, and the farmers were instructed that they have to try to force these children to eat non-kosher and never to keep any Shabbos and Yom Tov. They would literally hurt them and torture them and hit them and so on and so forth. So families were there was tragedies amongst the Jewish families all over Russia in those days. In addition to that, some other terrible things took place. The Russian government would tell a community, they would say by the amount of Jews that lived in the community, so many children have to be brought to the army. So what happened is that sometimes rich Jewish families who had money would bribe the officers of the army that they shouldn't take their children. But the officers of the army took the money and didn't take their children, but they were instructed to bring this amount of Jewish children. So who would lose out? Those who didn't have the money to pay for their children to be freed from the army. So we can imagine how communities also got ripped apart. People were angry why their child has to go, another child. It was a very terrible decree. Because of this decree, the Mittler Rebbe got up from Lubavitch, from the city of Lubavitch, from the shtetl of Lubavitch, and he traveled far away to the city of Haditch, to the Oyel of the Alter Rebbe. And that was around Elul or Tishrei or Cheshvan, I don't remember, of the last months of his life. He went to maybe a little earlier, he went to the Alter Rebbe's tzin to beg the Alter Rebbe to intercede by the Eibishter to help that this Gzeir should become bottled. And he davened there, and then he started traveling back towards Lubavitch. Unfortunately, the Mittler Rebbe got sick from the weather or whatever it was, and he couldn't travel any further than the city of Nyezhin, and that's where he passed away. He was nostalgic, and that's where the tziyun of the Mittler Rebbe is, far from Lubavitch. Now, when the Tzemach Tzedek became Rebbe, he was already involved in Askonas HaKlal beforehand in community affairs. But when he became Rebbe, he became totally involved, and he fought 2 battles, the famous ones, the big ones. There were many others. One was against the Maskilim, who tried to hurt the Yidden spiritually, and the other was to try and help and save some of these soldiers that were taken away from their families. Now, these soldiers got the name Cantonist. I read somewhere that Cantonist in Russian means a soldier from a family of soldiers, a soldier ben soldier sort of. Because since these kids were taken away so young and brought up usually in farmers' houses, but these farmers also served in the army, and then they were trained from a very young age, I don't know, 15 or 18, so that's why they got that name Cantonisten. By the Yidden, the word Cantonisten was when you spoke about a Jewish hero, a person who was Meiser Nefesh Mamish. And there will be certain stories that I will tell in Mitzvah Shem over the next few weeks, which shows you, first of all, who the Cantonisten were, what type of people they were, and how the Tzemach Tzedek looked at them, these Yidden that Pashut had to give their life up for Yiddishkeit because they were taken away so young from their families. Now we're going to go. We can't do all of it at the same time because it's intricate and it's a lot of details and it's very long. So we'll try our best. We'll start off with the battle that the Tzemach Tzedek had about the Cantonisten. And this will bring us later to the other battle and also to one of the harshest years that Tzemach Tzedek experienced in his life, which was the year Tov Reish Gimel, which comes out to be 1843. In 1843, the Tzemach Tzedek had his hardest year, supposedly, in his life. And we are going to talk about that. We're going to try to get to it in Mitzvah. We're starting off with a very interesting letter that was written by the Tzemach Tzedek himself, B'Ksav Yad Kotshoy, a letter that was written in the year 1845, 2 years after that harsh year that he had. Let me just touch upon that harsh year. The reason it was a harsh year, Tov Reish Gimel, which is 1843, Tzemach Tzedek was forced. They said that they're inviting him, but he was really forced to go to a conference of rabbis, of Rabbanim, in the city of Petersburg. And this was all, the government had a plan to try to trap the Tzemach Tzedek, to ambush him and to put him in prison, and worse, they had very horrible plans for the Tzemach Tzedek, and in order for the Yidden not to stand up about it and make a whole uproar, they made a tricky plan that they're inviting a few Rabbanim to come to Petersburg. I'm not going to talk about it right now, I'm just saying what was the harsh year about. The Tzemach Tzedek, I can only tell you one thing, the Tzemach Tzedek was arrested at that conference, which started in May, which was in the middle of the beginning of Iyar, and ended in the Chofs of Menachem Ov. It was supposed to be a 10-day conference. It lasted 6 weeks. Wow. And the Tzemach Tzedek was arrested 22 times, and each time arrested for treason, for rebelling against the Tsar, which meant that he carried a sentence, God forbid, of, I don't want to say, the opposite of life. Baruch Hashem, the Eibishter geholfen. We'll talk about it in Mitzvah Shem at another time. We're going now to a story where we find a letter from the Tzemach Tzedek in the year 1845. And the Tzemach Tzedek, we're going to try to read it, or every word, as much as possible. It's a very short letter, maybe 10 lines or less. And each word that we're going to talk about, we're going to try to give an explanation what that word means, because this letter was written in a remozim, which means any official from the government or maskil who were informers, Mosrim, would find this letter, they would have almost it would be impossible almost to figure it out. Even though now that we know the letter, it sounds easy, but they wouldn't be able to figure it out. Writes the Tzemach Tzedek as follows: to a certain Jew whose name was Reb Ze'ev Wolf. In the Hasidic circles, he's called Reb Velvel Vilenkis, or some say Vilenker. It seems from the Frierdiker Rebbe he writes Vilenkis. What that means exactly, I don't know. We're going to talk about this Reb Velvel Vilenker soon. So the Tzemach Tzedek writes a letter to him like this: Ahuvi Yididi Oiz, my beloved and strong friend. The Tzemach Tzedek should write such words. Ahuvi Yedidi Oiz, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, from the thousands of Chassidim, both of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittel Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. There were very few Yechidim, a few that you can count on the fingers, that the Tzemach Tzedek should write such words. Ahuvi Yedidi Oiz. Harehu Haraboni Hamuflug Havatik Havosik Umaskil, the veteran rabbi, the intelligent rabbi, Kisro Shel Torah, the crown of Torah, Meirenu Reb Ze'ev Wolf Neido Yoyer. He starts off the letter like this to him. And see if anybody in those days, a Moser, would be able to figure it out. I don't think so. He writes like this: Goydel Bakashosi Usheilosi, the Tzemach Tzedek writes, my great beseeching and pleading, my request, Avur, for Ohuv Nafshi, Kerea Keochli, the one who is beloved by me, like a friend and like a brother. Who's he talking about? Give me a second and I'll tell you. First of all, why is the Tzemach Tzedek, what's the friendship of the Tzemach Tzedek with Reb Velvel Vilenker, with this Reb Ze'ev Wolf that he's writing to him, Ahuvi Yedidi Oiz? One of the reasons is, and we'll speak later a little bit more in detail. Again, we're going back a little bit in time, but we're going to have to cover this to know a little bit who Reb Velvel Vilenker is and what the letter is about. So it says like this, that this Chassid Reb Velvel Vilenker was a very wealthy businessman, mostly in the city of Vitebsk, which is where he lived. And when they moved to Lubavitch, that means the Mittel Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek moved to Lubavitch. The Mittel Rebbe was the Rebbe then. Tzemach Tzedek was his son-in-law, but it wasn't Rebbe yet. So this Chassid Reb Velvel Vilenker used to do huge business. We'll talk about the details of it, but huge business he used to do. And he made the Tzemach Tzedek to become a partner of his. Tzemach Tzedek would invest some money, and he would support the Tzemach Tzedek and his family and his sons, so that Tzemach Tzedek could sit and learn all day. Tzemach Tzedek was completely involved in learning. So you understand already how close Reb Velvel Vilenker was to the Tzemach Tzedek. He writes to him, I'm beseeching you, I'm begging you, for my friend, who is like a brother and like a friend to me. Who is that? There was a Chassid called Reb Chaim Yehoshua from the city of Kalisk. And the story of Reb Chaim Yeshua is such a amazing story that we're going to say it exactly the way the Frierdiker Rebbe says it, but a little later on. I don't know if I'll manage to do it today. This Chassid Reb Chaim Yeshua literally gave up his life in order to ransom the Cantonist, which means to buy back Jewish soldiers that were kidnapped. He would pay off farmers to buy them their freedom and take them away from them. And he went around to different places in Russia. He was able to somehow find out secretly, where they sent those children. And he would go there, befriend, we'll talk about the details later, the Frierdiker Rebbe wants us to know the details. And he would befriend the farmers, and he would pay them money. He would act as if he's a businessman. He would pay them off and take these children and save them and take them to other places. They were never able to take them back to their parents' family, to their families, because the authorities will find them. The only thing they were able to do sometimes is inform the mother or father of the child that he's safe. He's not amongst the goyim anymore. That was the only thing. Some of these children came back to their families when they were 40, you hear what I'm saying? 40 years old. If they came back, correct. So this Chassid of Chaim Yeshua, for 8 years, he would ransom, that means redeem, buy back these children, and he did it for hundreds of children. 8 years he did it, until, unfortunately, a Lithuanian Yid, a Musser, trapped him, and he was caught and imprisoned. And this is what the Tzemach Tzedek is writing to Rebbe of Chabad. I'm begging you, I'm beseeching you, I'm pleading with you for my friend, doesn't say who, but we know from the letter, because later on this was explained by Rebbe of Chabad, who this is, that this is Reb Chaim Yeshua, who did secret work in saving Cantonist. Who was the person who gave over this letter to Rebbe of Chabad? Also, everything that Tzemach Tzedek did was very secretive. As a matter of fact, we're going to say it after the letter, how did Tzemach Tzedek ran his army. It looked like an army, meaning to say that the same ideas and intellect and secrecy, just like in an army. Tzemach Tzedek was very, very organized and obviously very super intelligent. Let's see who gave over the letter to, Velvo. It was a chassid called Reb Sender Yechiel Nishmas Eden from the city of Dubrovnik. And he was sent around by the Tzemach Tzedek, in addition to trying to get children back, those soldiers who were already grown-ups and they still worked in the army. Tzemach Tzedek would send chassidim, this was one of them, Reb Sender Yechiel, to go and encourage these. He would go to their army bases and encourage these Cantonisten. They should be strong in their emunas Hashem, and they should keep the Torah and mitzvahs. Not only that, but he would also give them money for their own expenses if they needed. If a guy had to buy tefillin or whatever it was. And where was all the money coming from? The Tzemach Tzedek, who collected it from the Chassidim for tzedakah. So he writes to Belvel, I'm begging you, lefakeach be'eino p'kicha b'chol liboy. Keep a very open eye with your whole heart, v'nafshay, and your whole neshama, lo'ha'iloi, to help him. Again, we're talking about Chaim Yeshua, but it doesn't say a word about it in the letter. V'ligmoil chazdoi, give him, pay him back kindness to this person, this unnamed person. He says to Rebbe, do it for me. What's the pshat of these words? First of all, lefakeach be'ena p'kicha. What does that mean? To hold your eyes open. The Chassid of Chaim Yeshua was arrested by the authorities in a very, very strong imprisonment. What's the pshat strong? Wherever he went, wherever they took him, he was in chains. And they took him from prison to prison, I guess because they were afraid somebody's going to stick up for him, so they kept him all the time in prisons. Took him 6 or 7 months, I think, till they brought him to Vitebsk. And the decree against him was that he's going to be judged, not by a regular judge, but an army court, an army tribunal. In the army, for such type of sin of going against the Tsar's army, it was one punishment. The Hepach HaChaim Chas v'Shalom. So he told him, keep your eyes open very strongly, because he's now in Vitebsk, this is Reb Chaim Yeshua, and the governor of Vitebsk spoke to people and prided himself, he boasted that he is going to hang Reb Chaim Yeshua publicly and to death. In other words, finished. And they had to do ishtadlus, this Velva Vilenka and so on, that the first ishtadlus was to make the court should be a civil court, not an army court. That's the first thing. Or automatically it'll be more lenient. And they did that. The Velva Vilenka and some other chassidim were able to do that. So what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying to Rebbe is, keep your eyes open that the governor of Vitebsk shouldn't be able to chas v'sholom do his plan. Then he says to him, you should open your eyes b'chol libay, with your whole heart. What does that have to do? So the one who explained the letter, a chassid, who heard it from Rebbe of Chabad was very wealthy and very intelligent, super, but also very strong-minded. You couldn't get him to make decisions stamazeh. And even if something terrible was happening, he would use his common sense. He was a very wise man. And Tzemach Tzedek is hinting to him that not rational, but he was very rational, So Tzemach Tzedek is hinting to him, not always is it good to just use the mind. In a case like this, you got to let your heart control your decisions. That's not so rational, but it'll be, things will get done. Then after them it says, to do kindness with this unnamed Chassid, Reb Chaim Yeshua. Says the Rebbe of Chabad explained that the Tzemach Tzedek was telling him, Reb Chaim Yeshua was Moise Nefesh for Pidyon Shvuim. And now he has to be redeemed. The Pidyon Shvuim has to be on him. So Ligmo El Chaz, they pay him back kindness. Then the Tzemach Tzedek says some frightening words. Mesiras Nefesh. Then the Tzemach Tzedek adds some frightening words. Ulema'ani Yaseh. What is the pshat? So he says an interesting thing. There was a secret meeting once that the Tzemach Tzedek called in the year Tov Kuf Tzadik Dalet. That's about 3 years after the Tzemach Tzedek officially became Rebbe. He called a meeting of some great Chassidim. It was a secret meeting to decide how are we going to fight the decree of the Cantonist and the kidnappers, Jewish people who were kidnapping children for money. How do we fight it? And this Chassid, Reb Zev Wolf Vilenker, got up by that meeting and said that the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe, should not get involved in this, because they will find out in the end, and this will be terrible, terrible agmas nefesh. The Tzemach Tzedek argued with his Chassid and said, Al Pi Din, you have to be Moise Nefesh and you must get involved in doing this. Tzemach Tzedek brought Ricess Al Pi Din. He brought Ricess from the Alter Rebbe and from the Mendel Rebbe. Therefore, he's writing now to Rebbe of Chabad, Lema'ani Yaseh, because it's not just Reb Chaim Yeshua who is sitting in prison now, but actually it's as if I'm sitting in prison because I could have gotten involved. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying. And then the Tzemach Tzedek continues, V'lizkor avas ne'urim, remember the love that we had to each other in the younger days, which is also a hint to this Rebbe of Chabad. This Rebbe of Chabad, when he came to the Alter Rebbe, he asked the Alter Rebbe for a tikkun for some averis. And the Alter Rebbe told him, if you do a mitzvah with Kabbalas oil, Malchus Shemaim, against your own seichel, that's a tikkun, he says to him. So the Tzemach Tzedek is now saying, remember what the Alter Rebbe told you. And then he finishes off the letter, Ov HaRachmim, the merciful Father, running out of time it says, the merciful Father should awaken mercy on us and give us a blessing, the triple blessing of Bane, Chaye, Umezoyne. And Tzemach Tzedek ends off with a few interesting things. Signs his name, not usual, but he writes Menachem. Tzemach Tzedek writes Menachem. I don't remember why. And then, somewhere it says a reason. And then he writes, please give my regards to the Chassid, the famous rich Chassid, Reb Gavriel Neira Yoyer. Gavriel was Reb Gavriel Noisechen, a famous Chassid who was at first very poor, and his relatives, the Misnagdim, caused him trouble, and then he became a very big millionaire with the blessing of the Alter Rebbe. This Reb Gavriel was very close to the government people in Vitebsk. They all respected him. He was already now at the age of about 90 or 100. He lived very long. 110 or something, 111. So he actually was the one, Rebbe of Chabad went to him, and he was the one who got the governor to back off and let the court case be a civil court case, so that Chaim Yeshua should not be put to death. In the end, we'll talk about it later, we'll get to that story. Let's continue now. The end was that they were able to bribe the government officials in Vitebsk, and they allowed Reb Chaim Yeshua, we're going to see it again later, Reb Chaim Yeshua to leave on the condition that he moves far away from Vitebsk, that nobody should ever, by those days, nobody should figure out this illegal move that they made. They got money for it, a lot of money. And Reb Chaim Yeshua lived the rest of his life in a Jewish community somewhere far away. And later on, before he passed away, he told over the whole story how this all happened, what the Frierdiker Rebbe tells us. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes as follows. Frierdiker Rebbe says, this letter of the Tzemach Tzedek that he wrote to the Chassid Reb Zev Wolf Vilenkis, right? He says that Reb Zev Wolf was a very big businessman in Vitebsk. He had a huge department store, and he also bought pieces of forest, pieces of land from the landowners that he used to develop into lumber or whatever it was. All his workers and managers of Reb Wolf Vilenker were all Chassidim and Anshe Maise. Chassidim and Frume Yidden. He was very involved in communal affairs, this Rebbe Wolf. He was known amongst all the important people in the city of Vitebsk. And as I told you before, he was intelligent and strong-minded. And often the governor of Vitebsk, or the county of Vitebsk, used to call him to the office to complain to him and mussar him about the Yidden's sins, what the Yidden are doing. The government would limit the Yidden, like in a chokehold, that the Yidden can't make no money, they can't go to this place, to that place. And if a Yid snuck into a place to sell some of his wares, right away somebody informed, and the governor would call Rebbe of Chabad to mussar him about his brothers, the Yidden, who are doing this. Now, the next week, Mitchell, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say just a little bit about Rebbe of Chabad, who he was, what family he came from, how he got to the Alter Rebbe, and then we're going to go straight to the story of how the Tzemach Tzedek's Chassid of Chaim Yeshua, how he got involved in helping in this battle against the Cantonist and against the kidnappers. Very amazing and frightening story, a hair-raising story. Thank you very much, everyone, and Mashiach now.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. All the best.
What day next